Today, I want to talk about something a bit more serious, subjective, and highly controversial. A few months ago, I publicly released my coming out story on YouTube and other social media platforms. In that video, I described my experiences as a young Christian boy growing up in the church and how my church ultimately kicked me out and prohibited me from future involvement after I came out. So today, I want to give more detail around why I was let go of my church, but also pull back the curtain even further and talk about how my belief system dramatically changed in the last 9 years since I came out. Now, I just want to clarify that this video is not meant to attack or condemn anyone that is either religious or strong in their faith. And the goal of this video is to simply share my personal experiences, how it changed me, and what my faith has become as a result of that. I grew up in the same Christian church my entire life. I was excited and heavily involved and became a type of youth leader eventually. And I had so many wonderful adult mentors that I worked alongside with. I participated in many church worship teams. I volunteered at camps and in our children's ministries department. So jumping ahead to when I came out. When I even started telling people that I was gay, it was like a wave of telling everybody in the span of 2 to 4 weeks. So I sat down to lunch with my youth pastor one day, and this is where I told him that I had come out to my entire family as a gay man. And after I told him, he was very caring and sensitive and told me how he sees me, and his perception of me as a person didn't change regardless of my being gay, nor would my involvement on church teams be affected. After I had come out, it was such a hard time for my parents, and I argue more so for my dad. He tried to convince me to talk to therapists, and he sent me information on conversion therapy programs to consider. I'm grateful he didn't force me into those programs, which is sad to think that so many have been forced into them. The reason I bring up conversion therapy is because I argue that this is undeniably the most harmful, corrupt, and unforgivable branch that has grown from the tree of religion. I recognize that it's not a prominent staple of the church, but even though it's smaller in scale, the fact that some camps and programs are still legal and allowed to exist for conversion therapy is a travesty, because I find these programs to be so emotionally damaging to the individuals subjected to them. And it's rooted on the belief that being gay or queer is a moral choice and something that we can control. So the question I turn around and ask a heterosexual person is, when did you make the conscious choice to be straight? I guarantee most, if not all of them, would say that they didn't make a choice and that it was the natural thing to do and didn't have to think twice about it. So just apply that same logic to the LGBTQ community. As a gay man, I didn't choose to be gay. If anything, it was even harder to deal with the realization that I was gay. It would have been easier within my life to have been straight, given my family and the world I was brought up in. But I can't change what's natural about me and how I was born to feel. But I digress. And so it was about 3 or 4 months after telling my youth pastor that I was gay where things changed. I got a phone call on my way into work, actually, from the same youth pastor I came out to. And I could tell he was troubled. He told me that it had been brought to the attention of the church elders that I had recently posted a picture on Facebook with me and another guy. It was their assumption that since I had come out as gay, that this picture with another guy meant that I was either in a relationship or pursuing something sexual with this guy. And since I was sharing my being gay with another man openly on Facebook, this wasn't okay with the church elders, and this was the deciding factor around my future involvement. Coming from the same church I literally grew up in as a child, and all it took was one innocent photo for them to make an assumption and a decision without asking me or extending the simple courtesy of talking to me first. And for the record, this photo that they based their decision off of was of me and my best friend whom I had just recently met, and we've been the best of friends for 9 years since then. Not that it matters if it had been a photo of me and a boyfriend, but they didn't even ask. They made their assumptions. They used it as ammunition. And then they cowardly tasked my youth pastor to be the messenger, whom later confided in me that the decision was not his to make in the end, and his beliefs and viewpoints towards me were very much different than theirs. And to add insult to injury, immediately after that happened, I got a message from someone else at the church who told me that despite what had just happened, that I don't give up on the church and not let it affect my belief in God and the church in general. But it was ironic to have them say this to me because look what just happened to me. I'm not saying that there aren't churches out there that do accept gay people, but to be sent a message to not give up on the church right after the church had blatantly kicked me out, it's almost like being fired from a company you've been at for years, but having them tell you that even though you're fired after years of service, we encourage you to not give up on the company and you're welcome to reapply again. It was also an eye-opening experience when I attended my first Gay Pride Festival in Seattle, and the astounding difference in energy between the LGBTQ community versus the religious groups on the side. One group enraptured in so much positivity, celebration, and love, and the other just screaming so much hate at everyone. And the haters were people yelling in the name of Jesus Christ. I never condemned anyone the way that those people were condemning the LGBTQ crowd. And it was overwhelming to be on the other side of the line that the church draws between them and the rest of the world. Back in my home, I was also questioning old habits and evaluating my faith. It almost felt like I was shedding layers of my old self, while also giving myself permission to feel released from certain guidelines and principles that were always taught and governed by the church. During my coming out process, it was the first time that a fellow gay person helped me dissect and evaluate passages found in the Bible. And yes, there are many passages in the Bible that call the act of homosexuality an abomination, but there are so many other passages that speak of many other abominations or punishable acts to God, and here are just a few I found. One that says if a man commits adultery with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. Another one that says, you shall not let your cattle breed with a different kind, nor shall you sow your field with two kinds of seed, nor shall you wear a garment of cloth made of two kinds of material. Another that says unequal weights are an abomination to the Lord, and false scales are not good. This also played into another verse about unequal room measurements being an abomination. Another that says, then her former husband who sent her away may not take her again to be his wife after she has been defiled, for that is an abomination before the Lord. Another one that says, and the pig is unclean to you. You shall not eat any of their flesh, and you shall not touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you. I can't tell you how many times my father barbecued pork during the summer, or that bacon wasn't a staple at breakfast. And another one that says, but anything in the sea or the rivers that does not have fins or scales is detestable to you. Basically, you can't eat shellfish, so clams, oysters, crab, lobsters. My point is that there are so many punishable acts, rules, or abominations listed in the Bible, and many more that I just listed. But for some reason, the church chooses to pick and choose which ones to uphold and which ones are no longer deemed relevant. And none of those abominations I just listed above bear any weight within the Christian church community I grew up in. But if you stop to think about that, many of those abominations are frankly outdated and ridiculous to abide by. Not mixing fabrics, not eating shellfish, not being able to get back together with an ex-wife. And a big one in adultery, and that both people caught in adultery are to be put to death. None of that makes sense in this day and age. And it's because it was supposedly written thousands of years ago by men who applied these principles in ways more arguably relevant to them at the time and to their specific culture and time period. So many of these abominations are no longer relevant to this day and age because of how the world evolves. But who gets to choose which abominations are still applicable and which ones are not? And that's just scratching the surface when dealing with a glaring amount of hypocrisy found within the principles of the church, as well as many legitimate questions around subjective relevancy and how they even hold up in today's world. I found the rituals, commandments, and general guiding principles in the Bible on how to govern your life to be very overwhelming. You're told so many things not to do, and there are good passages that do speak of showing kindness to others, but there's always a higher standard set upon you to abide by and live up to in order to win favor with God and go to heaven. And as a struggling teenage gay kid in the closet with words like abomination beaten into my brain, I just felt a lot more shame, constant guilt, and so much pressure to be and act a certain way. The first sensation of utter relief was when I finally came out, but then I felt even more weight leave my shoulders once I stepped back from the church and allowed myself to just be me and to think for myself and not be concerned with the notion of whether or not everything I think or do would determine my ticket to heaven. And meeting new people, making new friends, and being exposed to so many colorful communities and new experiences, many deemed to be sinful or immoral according to church standards, only opened my eyes that much more to all the beauty that's in the world. And it's how I met some of the best people in my life, fellow sinners like me who love me unconditionally. And the saddest part is that this level of hate or discrimination between the church and the LGBTQ community is still a large issue around the world. Even though my church kicked me out, nor will my own dad ever to this day be supportive of me being a gay man, I do count my blessings in that I wasn't kicked out of my family's house. Nor was I forced into conversion therapy, but I've read and heard so many horrific and tragic stories involving gay teenagers being disowned from families, the church going as far as to pull families apart. I actually know of an adult man who was married to a woman, they had children, and they were loyal churchgoers, but then the man, who was always a loving father, finally came out as gay, and the church actually stepped in to help the now ex-wife keep the children away from the ex-husband, telling his own children to stay away from him since he's committed to leading a sinful, destructive life. I know of a woman in an opposite situation who got married to a man, had kids, came from a religious family, and the woman eventually came out as a lesbian, and so many of her own immediate family members cut themselves off from her. And for the church to commit acts that tear families apart, emotionally and sometimes physically harming teenagers and young adults through conversion therapy, and condoning kids being kicked out of the house and some ending up homeless, is just unforgivable. Coming from an institution built upon the foundation of and always preaching the simple fact that God loves everyone. Like I've said, I know that there are churches and church families that openly welcome members from the LGBTQ community. I know that LGBTQ discrimination from the church does not apply to all churches or God-fearing people. The world isn't black and white like that, and for those people who embrace the church and their faith in God while also showing support to the LGBTQ community, it's amazing, and it's important for everyone to find their community, find their tribe, find their beliefs, and embrace one another for their differences. I don't consider myself even remotely religious anymore, nor do I have a belief in a specific definable God, and I no longer judge myself based on the biblical definition of morality. I do believe that if there is a God, that He created me just as I am. I do believe in destiny. I believe things happen for a reason. I believe in a higher power. I believe in good karma and sharing positive energy and love with others. I personally don't believe that the Bible is the foundation on how I should live my own life. And that could offend people to hear, but I don't judge those that think differently. I think human beings alone are enormously diverse. I think society is constantly evolving. But what doesn't change is the act of kindness, the act of acceptance, the act of loyalty, the act of patience, the ability to be open-minded, and the act and ability to love unconditionally. Those simple acts never change with time. And I personally believe they create much larger positive impacts on people, a lot more than the Bible ever did for me. So that's where I am now. Those were my experiences with the church and how my belief system has evolved. I released myself of my religious restraints, my shame, and allowed myself to go out into the world and further educate myself and evolve into the man I'm meant to be. Rather than choosing to leave the church on my own terms, I was sadly kicked out, but it was ultimately my own choice to not go back. At the end of the day, the most important thing you can do is be true to who you are, even if that means having to let go of parts of you. So once you embrace who you are without shame, surround yourself with people that think your true self is beautiful and support you, that's when you really start to live your best life as your best self.